On our 10th wedding anniversary, right in front of our closest friends and family, Logan Hartman raised his champagne glass to toast a new beginning and casually announced that he was leaving me for Sophie Allen, my own sister. What he didn't know was that the gift box sitting on my lap at that very moment did not contain the luxury watch he had been hoping for. Inside was the divorce file I had prepared 3 weeks earlier after discovering their affair, along with evidence that could not only ruin his reputation, but also destroy his entire career. I still remember the exact moment everything started to fall apart. It was an ordinary Tuesday in March, unusually warm for spring in Riverview. That day, I had left work early planning to surprise Logan with a pair of tickets to the jazz festival he had been hinting at for months. Our 10th anniversary was approaching, and I wanted to rekindle the memory of our first date at a small jazz bar in the city, where our love had first blossomed amid the blue notes and whiskey sours. When I got home, the house was silent, not unusual since Logan often stayed late at the law office where he'd been promoted just last year. I took off my shoes at the door, headed upstairs intending to hide the tickets in my jewelry box, the one place he never touched. And then I heard running water. The sound came from the master bathroom. I smiled briefly. Maybe he'd come home early too. A surprise dinner date? I pushed open the bedroom door, ready to joke that I was coming in to join him in the shower. But the words froze on my lips when I saw a handbag on the bed. A coral leather designer purse I had complimented Sophie on just last month. I stood frozen for a few seconds. 1,000 other possibilities flashed through my mind, but deep down I already knew. The water stopped running, then came a familiar laugh. Sophie's laugh followed by Logan's low voice. I backed away from the door, my heart pounding so loudly it felt like the walls could hear it. I drove around aimlessly for hours, gripping the now crumpled pair of tickets in my hand. When I returned, the house was empty. The only trace of his presence was a hastily scribbled note. Emergency meeting with a client. I sat at the kitchen island staring at the familiar handwriting and felt something inside my chest crack sharp and cold. That night Sophie called. Her voice was unnaturally cheerful as she asked how my day had been. I played along. Our usual sisterly banter now felt grotesque. "How's work lately?" she asked, busy. I replied, thinking of that vivid handbag lying on my ash-gray bedsheets. "And you?" She launched into a story about a difficult client, never once mentioning she'd spent the afternoon in my bathroom with my husband. That night, lying on the bed I'd just changed with fresh sheets, still faintly scented with Sophie's signature perfume, I tried to trace back the start of it all. Logan and Sophie had always been close, maybe too close. I used to be glad they got along, used to leave them chatting at family gatherings while I helped Mom prepare dinner. How many times had Logan volunteered to pick Sophie up from the airport whenever she flew in from New York? I scrolled through old texts between Logan and me, long work trips, late nights at the office, sudden weekend conferences. The signs had been there, but I had trusted him too much, been too certain of my place in his heart. I didn't plan to confront them right away. Whatever happened, I wouldn't be the unhinged wife, the betrayed sister who lost control. If this marriage was over, and deep down I already knew it was, then I would end it on my terms. The next morning I called in sick to the architecture firm where I worked as a senior project manager. It was so out of character that my assistant Tina Monroe asked me twice if I was okay. I told her I had a migraine, the first of many lies I would tell over the coming days. I created a new email account with a name Logan wouldn't recognize and contacted 3 divorce attorneys, setting appointments for the following day. Then I called the bank and requested detailed statements of our joint accounts for the past year. I wasn't just a heartbroken wife, I was a strategist. Every move I made had a purpose to understand exactly what I was up against. That afternoon, Logan texted, "Working late, don't wait up." I replied, "That's fine. I need to prep for my presentation." I kept my tone normal. He responded with a heart emoji. I stared at it, wondering how he could send the same emoji to 2 sisters without his phone catching fire from sheer hypocrisy. The first attorney, Daniel Greystone, welcomed me into his office overlooking Riverview Lake. He took notes in silence as I laid out the entire story. When I finished, he asked, "Are you sure you want a divorce?" "Many couples recover from infidelity with counseling," I answered with a strange calm in my voice. "It's not just the affair. The other woman is my sister Sophie." His brow furrowed. "Well, then that complicates things." The second attorney, Cynthia Nash, focused on finances. "Any unusual activity in your accounts?" Large transactions, new investments. I admitted I hadn't checked. She urged me to move fast. If he suspects you're onto him, money can disappear very quickly. The final consultation was with Graham Ellis, a well-known expert in discrete divorce proceedings around Riverview. Unlike the others, he asked a question that caught me completely off guard. What do you want from this divorce? Not just financially, what do you want for yourself? I was silent. I had thought I only wanted Logan and Sophie to suffer as I had, but saying it aloud felt petty. In the end, I answered, I want to walk away from this with my dignity intact. I want to understand how the two people I trusted most could betray me this deeply, and I want to be protected. I had invested an entire decade into building this marriage with Logan Hartman, and I would not allow anyone, not even him, to erase those years as if they had never existed. Graham Ellis nodded, his expression thoughtful. That's a good starting point. Now let's discuss how we can achieve that with the least amount of damage to you. I chose Graham as my representing attorney because there was something in his calmness that stirred something in me, the part that didn't want to burn everything to the ground, even though the fire of betrayal still raged inside me. That evening, I sat down alone and wrote out a detailed timeline of Logan's behavior over the past year. Every late night, every business trip, every possible opportunity for him and Sophie to sneak around. Patterns began to emerge: conferences in Riverview that lined up perfectly with Sophie's weekend shopping trips from New York. Those family gatherings where they'd suddenly disappear for a while, only to return with perfectly reasonable explanations. No one ever questioned it. 2 days later, the bank statements arrived, revealing a series of transactions I never would have noticed before. Small transfers to an unfamiliar account, hotel bills right here in town. Not large enough to draw suspicion, but frequent enough to tell a story. Dinners for two at restaurants Logan had never mentioned. And worst of all, a transaction at Tiffany's 3 months ago for a piece of jewelry I never received. My birthday had passed with no gift, Christmas too. That spending trail haunted me like a ghost. Concrete evidence that the gift had been for Sophie. The sense of betrayal was no longer abstract. It had become tangible. I considered confronting Logan immediately, but abandoned the thought. Our anniversary was coming up soon, an occasion we always celebrated with our closest friends and family. It was Logan's idea to throw a big party this year, renting out a private room at Landsmere, the restaurant with the river view. At the time, I'd been touched by his thoughtfulness, but now I understood it was all part of the cover, a final curtain to disguise the ending he had already planned. Throughout my investigation, I maintained the facade of the flawless wife I cooked, his favorite meals, laughed at old stories, and even attended a partner's house party, with him eagerly sharing plans for a summer vacation I knew would never happen. Every night I lay next to him in bed, my body rigid, wondering, how could the man I once trusted implicitly sleep so peacefully, as if nothing were wrong? Sophie called me twice that week. Her voice was sweet, brimming with feigned concern. Have you prepared anything for the anniversary yet? She asked, offering to help plan. 10 years is a big milestone. Camille, Logan's handling most of it. I replied, picturing her coral handbag sprawled across my bed. He's very particular about the details. So like him, she said, and I could hear the faint smirk in her voice, that private joy that stabbed at my heart. Always such a perfectionist. Always, I echoed, thinking of hotel receipts and flawless excuses. Logan was meticulous in everything, including betrayal. A week before the anniversary, I met with Graham again and presented all the financial evidence I had gathered. He flipped through each document calmly, a faint look of satisfaction in his eyes. You've done very well, Camille. Most clients come in with emotion. You brought evidence. What's the next step? I asked, surprised at how composed I sounded. That depends on you, Graham said. We can file immediately or prepare everything and wait for your signal. He paused, watching my face. Do you have a date in mind? I thought about the party, about Sophie's presence as a beloved guest. Something cold but resolute settled inside me. Next Saturday is the anniversary, I replied. I think that's the right moment. A clean line between the past decade and what's ahead. Graham didn't show emotion, he only nodded. If that's your decision, I'll be ready. He pulled a folder from a drawer. These are the preliminary divorce papers. Once you sign, we can proceed with the filing. I'll include all financial documentation in the official record. I took the folder much lighter than the burden I'd carried for so many days. Thank you. The remaining days passed on the thin edge between rehearsed fiction and quiet preparation. I continued playing the part of the unsuspecting wife while planning every step with precision. I chose my outfit for the party carefully, not the red dress Logan had once said he longed to see me in, but an elegant black gown that made me feel like I was wearing armor. I also hired a private car to wait outside the restaurant, ensuring I had an escape route no matter what happened. Most importantly, I prepared my words, not an outburst of anger, but a short, clear speech that would show I wasn't a victim, but a woman who knew how to stand up and preserve her dignity. I practiced alone in the car during lunch breaks, adjusting my tone to be firm without bitterness. The day before the anniversary, I visited my mother under the pretext of borrowing jewelry for the party, but in truth I wanted to look into her eyes. The woman who had raised both Sophie and me, and see if she had any suspicions. There was nothing. She simply beamed and said, "10 years, sweetheart. Your father and I are so proud of the marriage you and Logan have built." I nodded, accepting the pearl earrings she offered. Keepsakes from her own anniversary long ago. My throat tightened as she fastened them onto my ears, those warm, gentle hands. Whatever happened tomorrow, I knew she would be the next casualty in this chain of betrayal. That night, Logan handed me a small silver-wrapped box ribbon tied just right. A little something before the anniversary. He said his smile once my weakness, now just a faded echo. Inside was a silver bracelet, pretty but soulless, the kind of gift you'd give a coworker, not the woman you'd been married to for 10 years. I thanked him with the appropriate expression, wondering if Sophie had also received the Tiffany's gift with the same fake smile. When Logan went to shower, I quietly placed the divorce file into an identical box, same silver wrap, same bow, so similar he wouldn't notice the difference. Until it was far too late, I placed the gift box in the drawer, ready to slip it into my handbag before leaving the restaurant tomorrow. I couldn't sleep that night. I lay awake next to Logan Hartman, listening to the steady, indifferent rhythm of his breathing, a man far too accustomed to living with deceit. In the darkness, I quietly studied his face, the man who had once been my husband, now no more familiar than a stranger. It felt as if I were looking at him from some distant future, a place where he was no longer the center of my life. The next morning, my phone buzzed with messages from friends, those who would be attending the party that evening. One particularly long message came from Sophie Allen, bubbling with excitement about celebrating her favorite couple. That entire day, Logan behaved with unusual thoughtfulness, bringing me coffee in bed, inviting me for a lakeside walk like we used to do when we first dated. I participated in every anniversary ritual, even as I knew deep down that tonight, everything would change irreversibly. While doing my makeup, as I stared intently into the mirror, I caught Logan watching me, his gaze unreadable. For a moment, I wondered if he sensed something. Did his instincts warn him that the mask of our marriage was about to shatter? But then he smiled and told me I looked beautiful in that same confident tone I once adored. I understood Logan still believed his lies were perfectly concealed. Silently, I slipped the divorce documents into my purse. Everything was in place, not just legally or financially, but mentally. The woman walking into Landsmere that evening was no longer a stunned victim of a strange handbag. She was someone who had taken control firmly and deliberately in a script she wrote herself. On the way to the restaurant, Logan reached for my hand. "To 10 happy years, Camille," he said, his voice soft and seemingly sincere. "May the next 10 be even better." I smiled, then turned to look out the window, watching the city of Riverview glowing under the night sky. "Yes," I whispered, "the next 10 will be exactly what we deserve." The next morning I woke with an unusual sense of clarity. The sting of betrayal was no longer a slow bleeding wound. It had become a sharp blade in my hand. I needed to know every corner of the betrayal, where it began, how long it lasted, and who else was involved. I started with the place where secrets hide best, Logan's home office. He had left early that morning, claiming he had breakfast with clients for the anniversary, a lie, of course. His walnut desk looked tidy as always, but I wasn't fooled. I didn't try to access his computer, too risky. Instead, I went through each drawer carefully, putting everything back exactly as I found it. And then in the bottom drawer, hidden behind a stack of law journals, I found a second phone. Cheap, the kind of phone you'd see in a crime drama. My hand trembled slightly as I powered it on. No password. Logan, obsessive about security, had grown careless with his secrets. Text messages between him and someone saved as V stretched back 7 months. I forced myself to read them all in order, scene by scene, like a film of betrayal unfolding. What chilled me wasn't the flirtation but the conversations about their future. She suspects nothing. Logan had written 3 weeks ago. After the party, I can begin the next phase. Sophie had replied, perfect timing. My lease ends in May and the Riverview office has approved my transfer. Everything's falling into place. It wasn't just an affair. They were planning an entire new life, going public after the anniversary. I took screenshots of the important messages, then returned the phone exactly as I found it. Their calculated coldness, their precision as if I didn't exist, left me not heartbroken, but resolute. My next move was to visit the law firm where Logan worked. I pretended to drop off a surprise lunch. Naturally, he wasn't there yet. Another lie. I chatted with his longtime assistant, Linda Carver. He's been so busy lately, I said as I placed the paper bag on her desk. Working late weekend conferences, it must be exhausting. Linda hesitated slightly. Things have been tense lately with the Brooks merger. Brooks in Philadelphia, right? Logan said he flew out there twice last month. Linda's expression shifted noticeably. No Brooks Industries in Milwaukee, we've only had one meeting there. Then she quickly corrected herself. But Logan's handling several accounts at once, so maybe I'm mistaken. I kept my polite smile, but inside I'd gathered another piece of the betrayal puzzle. Could you please give him the lunchbox? I have to get back to work. I walked out of the building wearing a diplomatic smile, but in my head I was already texting an old friend, Emily Rhodes, a real estate agent who had helped us buy our home. Need to meet ASAP, professional matter. We met later that afternoon at a small cafe near her office. As I told her the story, Emily grew visibly uneasy, torn between her professional ethics and loyalty to me. I need to know if there's any activity involving the house that I haven't been told about. Appraisals, listings, anything. Emily hesitated. If you want me to check officially, Camille, I'll need your permission. You have it, I said firmly. I'm not asking you to break the law. I just want to know if my name is being erased from property I legally own. The next day, Emily called. Her voice was soft. There was an appraisal 3 weeks ago. It was requested by Logan through a broker named Jason Burke from Halston & Co. Realty. Jason Burke, I repeated, unfamiliar with the name. He specializes in handling high-value deals discreetly, Emily explained. Camille. This kind of appraisal usually precedes a quiet, urgent sale, and he instructed all contact to go through him directly. Another piece of the puzzle fell into place. Logan wasn't just planning to leave me, he was quietly arranging to liquidate our joint assets before I even realized what was happening. The timing lined up perfectly with the next phase he had mentioned in those texts to Sophie. Can I stop it? I asked Emily Rhodes. Since you're a co-owner, any transaction would require your signature. Emily explained, then paused, choosing her words carefully. But there are ways to pressure one party into selling. I thanked her, my mind already sketching out countermeasures. That evening, I called Graham Ellis to update him on my latest discovery. This changes the strategy, he said. We need to immediately request a freeze on the assets once we file. Given the recent appraisal, I also recommend preparing a motion to block any major financial activity without court approval. How quickly can we move? I asked. As soon as you're ready to file, Graham confirmed. I'll have all the paperwork finalized by the end of the day. The next lead came from an unexpected source. While reviewing Logan's credit card statements, I spotted a recurring charge for a storage unit far from our home. The fee was low enough to go unnoticed, $89 per month going back 4 months, but Logan had never mentioned renting any storage space. The manager seemed hesitant at first, but became more cooperative once I presented ID and proof of marriage. The account is under both your names, he said. Checking the computer, but we've only ever seen Mr. Hartman access it. I lost my key, I said, forcing a polite smile. Is there any way to verify my identity so I can access it today? 20 minutes and a few forms later, I stood before a small storage unit containing 4 designer suitcases and several sealed boxes. The suitcases held men's clothing neatly folded, Logan's size, but ones I had never seen at home. Likely new purchases or pieces he'd quietly moved out without me noticing. The boxes contained framed photos from his office, personal documents, and a few keepsakes. A portion of his life carefully packed and ready to be moved. Most telling of all was a leather folder tucked beneath the clothes inside were listings for condos in Harborview high-end buildings with security and lakefront views. Some were marked with Logan's handwritten notes, spacious, close to office high floor. This wasn't just an exit, it was a redesign of his life, more luxurious and clearly with Sophie. I took photos of everything, then restored the items exactly as I'd found them. Before leaving, I discreetly slipped a small GPS tracker into the lining of one suitcase, a device I had purchased after discovering the burner phone, not yet knowing what I'd use it for that evening. Logan suggested we have dinner at home, calling it a private celebration before the main anniversary party. He made his signature Italian pasta, uncorked an expensive bottle of wine, and recalled old memories in a wistful voice. The performance was flawless, a loving husband marking 10 years of marriage, his eyes warm and sincere as he raised his glass. The best decision I ever made, I matched his performance with equal finesse, laughing at the right moments, weaving my fingers through his across the table, my gaze soft while silently memorizing each lie. When he leaned in to kiss me, I caught a faint but distinct scent of unfamiliar perfume. Light but unmistakable Sophie's scent, something he'd unknowingly brought home with him. I kissed him back, automatically wondering if he could sense the revulsion inside me or if he simply didn't care. After he fell asleep, I retreated to the guest bathroom and called my mother. "Just calling to confirm you two are still coming for Sunday lunch," she said when she picked up. "I've planned something special for your anniversary." I gripped the phone tighter. The thought of facing her after tomorrow night made my stomach twist about Sunday. I said slowly, "Things might be complicated after tomorrow." "Complicated?" my mother asked. Concerned, "What's going on, Camille?" I hesitated, torn between protecting her and preparing her for the shock. "Mom, I found out something between Logan and Sophie. I'm going to address it at the party tomorrow night." The silence stretched sharp as a blade. "Tell me," she said finally, her voice stripped of the usual warmth. I told her briefly, without drama, but enough for her to grasp the scale of the betrayal. "When did you find out?" she asked, still composed. "About 3 weeks ago. I needed time to be sure." "Are you certain?" "Yes, they've been involved for at least 7 months, probably longer." After a moment she asked, "What do you need me to do?" I was stunned. I'd braced for shock, denial, even a defense of Sophie, but my mother simply asked what needed to be done. "Just be ready," I said. "After tomorrow things will move quickly. I may need a place to stay temporarily." "Your room's exactly the same," she replied without hesitation. "And Camille, I'm so sorry they did this to you, but I'm not surprised by how you're handling it." Her words grounded me again. Before I was Logan's wife or Sophie's sister, I was the daughter of Margaret Chen, a woman who taught me to face life with dignity and resolve. The next morning, the day of the anniversary, I called Rachel Lim, executive assistant to Charles Whitman, the senior partner at Logan's firm. Rachel and I had grown fairly close through past company events. I requested an urgent meeting, stating only that it involved Logan's professional ethics. Charles agreed to see me over lunch. His face was tense as I stepped into his office, overlooking the Riverview River. "Mrs. Hartman, this is unexpected. How can I help you?" I placed a folder on his desk, financial documents and evidence not just of personal betrayal, but of actions that could impact the firm's integrity. "I believe Logan has been diverting client assets," I said calmly. "What began as discrepancies in personal finances led me to uncover highly questionable patterns." Charles flipped through the pages. His expression remained professional, but his eyes grew increasingly serious. "These are serious allegations. Why bring this to me instead of the authorities?" "This is a courtesy," I replied. "Before making this public, I wanted to offer your firm the chance to handle it internally." "I understand the implications for your reputation." I didn't say it aloud, but Charles understood perfectly. This was leverage. If confirmed, what you've shown could implicate the firm as well. My willingness to allow internal handling meant everyone could still walk away intact. "Thank you for your discretion." "Mrs. Hartman," he said, "we'll treat this matter with the utmost seriousness." Mr. Whitman closed the folder. his expression contemplative. "May I ask what prompted you to begin investigating? I discovered Logan was being unfaithful." I replied plainly. From there, I started reviewing our finances and noticed some irregularities. He nodded slowly, clearly understanding the subtext. "The firm will need time to verify everything and determine an appropriate course of action." "Of course," I said as I stood. "I look forward to hearing the outcome." As I stepped into the elevator, my phone buzzed with a message from Sophie. "Can't wait for tonight. I have a little surprise of my own to share." The audacity almost made me laugh. Her surprise undoubtedly involved her move to Riverview, perhaps accompanied by a vague announcement of a new beginning. Only she and Logan would understand. Ironically, my sister intended to use my own wedding anniversary party as the backdrop for unveiling her affair. I drove to Auberdale, the restaurant hosting the celebration, to meet with Lillian Moore, the manager I'd corresponded with several times before Mrs. Hartman. "Everything is ready," she said with a professional smile. "The private room is set up just as requested." "Thank you, Lillian. I'd like to add one small detail." I replied and explained the plan for the second gift box, the surprise for my husband, which would be presented at a specific moment during the evening. "We're very familiar with coordinating surprise elements during celebrations," Lillian said, jotting a note on her tablet. "Would you like us to bring out the box with dessert?" "No, I want it brought out right after Logan's toast." "Understood," she confirmed with a nod. As I left Auberdale, my phone rang. Graham Ellis was calling. "Everything's in place as planned," he said. "As soon as you give the signal, we'll file the divorce petition, along with the emergency asset freeze request." "Thank you, Graham. I'm planning to proceed tomorrow morning. My associate will be on standby tonight. I've just sent you her number." I nodded, grateful for his meticulousness. As evening approached, I reviewed every detailed transportation arrangements, the placement of the document box inside the second gift. The guest room in our home had transformed into my command center. Evidence organized neatly, copies stored in multiple locations, and every key player now aligned. "You look stunning," Logan said as I stepped out of the bedroom in a perfectly fitted black gown. His eyes were full of admiration, the kind that used to melt me. Now I saw it for what it was, the gaze of a man assessing possessions, not a husband cherishing his wife. "You too," I smiled, adjusting his tie with familiar intimacy, ready to celebrate 10 years. He took my hand, kissed it gently like a scene from a well-rehearsed play. "Tonight will be unforgettable." "It certainly will be," I said, locking eyes with him. I believe that with all my heart. As our car pulled up to Auberdale, a strange sense of calm settled over me. Everything was in place. The investigation was complete. From the burner phone to the storage unit, the bank accounts to the plan to sell the house, every piece had been documented. There was nothing Logan or Sophie could do tonight that would catch me off guard. The valet opened the door and Logan offered his hand to help me out, ever the perfect husband. Above us, the restaurant's facade glowed under the lights of a city just beginning to sparkle. Inside, friends and family had begun to gather, unaware that they were about to witness the collapse of an illusion. Logan whispered in my ear, "Happy anniversary, sweetheart. Let's start over." I gripped the clutch containing the divorce papers. "Yes, Logan." A true new beginning. Lillian greeted us at the entrance with a polite smile that gave away nothing of our prior conversation. "Happy anniversary to you both. The Azure Room is ready. Your guests are gathering inside." She guided us through the main dining area, every eye turning toward the picture-perfect couple. 10 years of marriage, successful, stable. Logan rested his hand on the small of my back, a gesture of claimed possession, and I let it stay, knowing it would be the last time he touched me with such assumed confidence. The Azure Room was beautifully adorned. Soft lighting bathed the tables dressed in white roses and blue hydrangeas. A string quartet played our wedding song. Champagne flowed freely. 30 familiar faces basked in the warm glow of celebration, none of them aware of the truth about to surface. My mother stood near the window, elegant in a navy gown, her expression composed even after our conversation the night before. She hugged me tightly and whispered, "I'm here." Then turned to greet Logan with flawless courtesy, betraying nothing. Sophie arrived a few minutes later, radiant in a coral dress the exact shade of her infamous handbag. A silent statement or a private joke between her and Logan. She hugged us both, beaming. "This place is gorgeous. I brought a special gift for you two." She handed me a large, elaborately wrapped box. "Open it later." Something for the next chapter. I accepted it with a serene smile. How thoughtful. Tonight will definitely open a new chapter. She didn't notice Sophie had already turned to chat with someone else. Logan gave my shoulder a gentle squeeze before heading off to greet his colleagues, leaving me with the gift. I set it on the gift table right beside my own box, the one holding the divorce papers placed prominently at the front. Dinner unfolded like a choreographed performance. The courses were served seamlessly, the conversations were lively. I joined in appropriately, sharing a few curated anecdotes about wedded bliss, laughing on cue, maintaining the role, but my eyes never left Logan and Sophie. Their glances held a beat too long, fingers grazing during toasts, their steps in sync like seasoned dancers. I also took note of where everyone sat, who said what, so I'd know later exactly who had been present when everything fell apart. Logan's parents sat near us as protocol dictated, his father, ever the gentleman, his mother, who had once treated me like a daughter. I wondered what she'd think after tonight. With hesitant hands, Logan Hartman peeled away the silver wrapping, opened the lid of the box, and froze when he saw the divorce papers inside. His face went pale as his eyes skimmed the pages, the highlighted signatures, the attached financial disclosures. "I've had those documents prepared for 2 weeks," I said aloud, my voice cutting through the stunned silence of the room. "My attorney holds the full file, proof of the affair, concealed assets, and professional misconduct. Tomorrow morning, a court order will authorize the freezing of your accounts. Your plan to liquidate our shared assets will officially be stopped." Sophie Allen instinctively stepped back, recoiling from Logan as the full gravity of the situation hit her. This was no longer the graceful separation they had envisioned. This was exposure, consequences, a mess spiraling beyond their control. "You planned this all along," Logan barked, voice taut with fury. "You set me up." "No, Logan," I simply responded, "to the plan you set in motion." "There's a difference." I turned to the stunned guests. "I apologize that tonight turned into something none of you expected. I intended to resolve this privately, but Logan and Sophie chose to make it public, forcing my hand." At that moment, Lillian Moore appeared by my side. "Ms. Hartman, the second gift box you requested is ready." Perfect timing. A restaurant staff member entered carrying a box identical to the first. I took it and nodded my thanks. "This one's for you, Sophie?" I said, handing her the box. "A little anniversary gift to welcome your new beginning." Sophie's expression darkened as she unwrapped the paper. Inside were printed copies of all her messages with Logan photos of the storage unit and documentation of Logan's financial misconduct. "You should know exactly who you're choosing," I said, my voice softening slightly. "The man you're stepping into life with is not an exemplary attorney, nor a beloved philanthropist. He is a liar, a thief, and a man who plotted to deceive even the woman who once loved him." I turned again to the room. "Once again, I'm sorry for ruining this evening, but please enjoy the dinner, the wine. Everything has been paid for." I picked up my purse and walked toward the exit, past the sea of stunned faces. The moment I reached my mother, who had risen to greet me, I knew everything that needed to be said had been said. Not a word left behind. "Ready," she whispered as I reached her side. "Completely," I replied, linking my arm with hers as we stepped out of Auberdale. Logan's voice rang out behind me. "This isn't over, Camille." I stopped, turned to look at him one last time. "No, Logan, it's exactly over." Cool night air hit my face as I exited the restaurant. The car I had booked waited at the curb door, already open. From inside, I could still hear shouting protests, the unraveling chaos of a carefully staged performance. "You were incredible," my mother murmured as we settled into the car. "Your father would be so proud." I exhaled deeply, tension from weeks of holding it all in finally beginning to fall away. I didn't want it to be like this. "Mom, I really did love him." "You loved him truly," she said, squeezing my hand. "But sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from someone who never deserved that love." The car pulled away from Auberdale. Through the window, I saw Logan burst out onto the sidewalk, eyes wild, scanning every car until his gaze landed on mine. For a moment, everything was still, and then the car moved, putting distance between us, not just of blocks and buildings, but of an entire chapter closing shut. Tonight I had walked into that restaurant as Logan Hartman's wife on the path he laid out, but I left as Camille Hartman, the woman writing her own next chapter. A chapter born of pain. Yes, but also of truth and freedom. The next morning I woke in my childhood bedroom momentarily disoriented by the familiar ceiling I hadn't stared at in years. My mother had converted the space into a home office, but its spirit remained soft blue walls, a window overlooking the red maple tree that once shaded my teenage dreams. My old desk now held my mother's computer. Last night, she had quickly cleared it off, so I'd have space for the few personal items I brought. On my phone, 17 missed calls and 32 text messages. Friends offering support. Logan's parents asking to meet, colleagues checking in, but not a single word from Logan or Sophie. That silence spoke volumes. I skimmed the messages and replied to just one from Graham Ellis, my attorney. "The emergency order to freeze assets has been approved," he wrote. The judge was especially interested in the financial records. "This is playing out very favorably for us." Downstairs, I found my mother preparing breakfast with the same steady focus she applied to every crisis, from my father's death to my grandfather's illness to her own breast cancer battle 5 years ago. Margaret Chen always chose action over collapse. "I called Marissa this morning," she said, placing a coffee mug in front of me. "She gathered what essentials she could for you. Looks like Logan didn't come home last night." "Where'd she put everything?" I asked. "Taking the mug. In her guest room. You can stay there for a while if you'd like, or stay here as long as you need." She paused. "The locks on your house have been changed, just like you asked." "The security company was very cooperative," I nodded. Everything I'd set in motion yesterday was falling into place. The locksmith had been scheduled before the dinner even began. They were instructed to change the locks the moment Marissa confirmed Logan hadn't returned home, a legal safeguard given his attempt to sell the house behind my back. "I'll stay here," I said, "at least until I've got enough distance to think clearly." My mother said nothing, just nodded, and Sophie. "Any news?" "None. She's probably recalibrating because last night definitely didn't go how they planned." "No," my mother said with a faint smile, pride flickering in her eyes. "Not even close. You took your story back." The rest of the morning passed in tangible tasks, collecting my things from Marissa's, emailing my office, to take a week off, uploading all personal files to a secure digital vault where Logan would never reach them. The tasks I arranged myself kept me anchored in reality, preventing the waves of emotion from dragging me into a whirlpool of resentment or regret. Early in the afternoon, an unexpected visitor appeared. It was Julian Wade, a longtime colleague of Logan Hartman and someone who had witnessed last night's public unraveling. His expression was grim as my mother led him into the living room. "Camille, I'm sorry to drop by unannounced," he said, declining to sit, "but I thought you should know something big happened at the firm this morning." "What happened?" I asked, though I had a fairly good idea. Already, Charles Whitman called an emergency partners meeting. "Logan has been placed on administrative leave pending an investigation into the financial misconduct you reported." Julian hesitated. "I wasn't part of the closed session, but as of this morning, the accounting department's access was frozen. External auditors arrived about an hour ago. The machine I had set in motion was now turning faster than expected." "There's more," he added. "Logan showed up demanding access to his office and personal files. When denied, he raised his voice. Security had to escort him out." Picturing Logan, usually so composed and calculated, causing a scene in the lobby of that prestigious building felt surreal, but it was undeniable proof that his facade was crumbling. "Thank you for coming to tell me," I said sincerely. "I truly appreciate it." "We've been colleagues for 8 years," he replied. "What's between you and Logan is personal, but the professional fallout affects us all." He paused, then added, "And honestly, most people support how you handled it." Logan's behavior had eroded a lot of trust. After Julian left, I called Graham Foster to update him. "This only strengthens your position," he affirmed. "If the investigation confirms financial wrongdoing, it could directly affect asset division, even disqualify Logan from requesting spousal support. So is there anything else I need to do at this point?" I asked. "You've done exceptionally well," Camille Graham said. "Now we wait for Logan's formal response to the divorce filing. Given the circumstances, I suspect he'll aim to settle quickly to minimize further damage." That response came sooner than expected. Late that afternoon, Logan's name appeared on my phone screen. His first call since the party. I let it ring into voicemail, still unready to face him directly. His voice, when it came, was cold and controlled clearly. He had slipped back into lawyer mode. "Camille, we need to talk. What you did last night was overly public and damaging to both of us. I'm willing to propose a fair settlement if we can agree to keep things quiet moving forward. Call me." I laughed aloud the way he framed the exposure of the truth as my wrongdoing was almost impressive in its audacity. I forwarded the recording to Graham Classic. He replied shortly after. "He's trying to reassert control. I advise you not to respond directly. All communications should go through legal channels. What if he doesn't have a lawyer yet?" "Oh, he will soon. The firm investigation alone would force him to get legal counsel. My guess is he already has someone, he's just hoping to emotionally leverage you." First, Graham was right. That evening, I received notice that Logan had retained Miles Kavanaugh, a high-profile divorce attorney known for representing high-net-worth clients. Graham sounded pleased. Kavanaugh is tough, but he doesn't waste time on pointless arguments. He'll likely advise Logan to start conceding where it matters. That night, unable to sleep, I went downstairs and found my mother sitting quietly at the kitchen table, a mug of tea in front of her, and a spread of old family photographs. "I've been thinking about patterns," she said, gesturing to the pictures. Holidays, graduations, weddings, Sophie and I stood side by side in so many of them, eerily alike. Despite the 3-year age gap, I had always been the quiet, grounded one. Sophie lived on emotion. "What do you see in those patterns?" I asked. She picked up a photo from my high school graduation. In it, Sophie stood slightly apart from the rest of the family, her expression odd, a blend of pride and something else. Something almost like envy. "Sophie always wanted what you had," my mother said. "Academic achievements, your self-assurance, your stability. Not because she needed those things, but because she needed to be seen having them." I weighed her words, tracing back over our childhood. The year I got a scholarship in architecture, Sophie abruptly changed her major. When I started dating Logan, she cycled through high-achieving boyfriends like she was racing to keep up. "That doesn't excuse what she did," I said quietly. "No," my mother agreed. "Understanding is not the same as forgiveness, but recognizing patterns can help you heal." "You think she wanted Logan because he was mine? She wanted him because she thought he was happiness and your life. Camille, since you were young, has always been her blueprint for what happiness looked like." She gathered the photos, slipping them carefully back into the album. "The tragedy is Sophie has never seen her own value. She's always measured herself by looking at you." Her words didn't erase my pain, but they gave it a broader context, made it less about me and more about a deep, tangled pattern I neither caused nor could control. "What about you, Mom? What are you going to do about Sophie?" She was silent for a long moment, then finally said, "I'm still her mother. That doesn't change, but consequences and boundaries do. Trust once broken takes more than an apology to restore." The next morning, for the first time since the party, I heard from Sophie. Not a text, not a call, a handwritten letter delivered to my mother's house by a courier. The method of delivery said everything she knew, that any electronic communication could become legal evidence. The letter began with familiar words: "I never meant to hurt you." A line so hollow, considering the extent of her calculated betrayal, that everything after it already felt meaningless. What truly stood out to me was how she completely avoided apologizing. Not a single line read, "I'm sorry." Instead, Sophie leaned on emotions and sincerity as if they were merely following their hearts, perhaps clumsily but genuinely. The final part of the letter revealed its true purpose. "Logan is very concerned about the potential damage to his career. We hope you'll consider the broader consequences of further disclosures and possible litigation." And then a final plea steeped in manipulation. "Whatever happens, I know you wouldn't want to destroy everything he's worked for." I handed the letter to my mother without a word. She read it quickly, her expression tightening with each line. "She's trying to manipulate you," my mother said, returning the letter. "Trying to make you hold back to save Logan's career. No real accountability, no acknowledgement that any of this was deliberate from the beginning." "I didn't expect anything more," I admitted. The letter to me was nothing more than documentation, an early attempt to spin the narrative as an emotional mishap, not a calculated betrayal. I filed the letter away with the rest of the documents. Processing the emotions could wait for now. Actionable steps still took priority. The next morning, I received a call from Graham Foster Logan's attorney. Just reached out with a settlement offer. He said with a hint of surprise, "It's highly favorable to you." What I asked, skeptical. "They're proposing a clear division. You keep the house and receive 60% of the investment portfolio. Logan keeps his retirement accounts and personal belongings." "Is there a catch?" I asked, suspicious of the sudden generosity. "There is one condition: complete confidentiality. They want a strict non-disclosure agreement covering all aspects of the divorce, financial or otherwise, with harsh penalties for violation." I understood immediately. The investigation at the firm must have uncovered something serious. Logan was now scrambling to protect his reputation and avoid criminal charges. "What do you recommend?" I asked. "It's worth considering," Graham said, "but I advise adding a few protective clauses to ensure your rights in case of a breach." The following week passed in a blur of legal negotiations and practical tasks. I returned to the house, now legally mine, to sort through what I wanted to keep. The familiar space felt strange. In the master bedroom, I found signs of a hasty removal. Logan must have snuck back to retrieve his things. Likely while I was in a meeting with Graham. That violation didn't sting the way it once might have. If anything, it brought clarity, even relief. I sorted through what held genuine meaning to me. Items separate from Logan's taste or social aspirations. I scheduled a cleaning service to deep clean the house, stripping away the remnants of a shared past. The master bathroom, where I had once heard Sophie's laugh over running water, was repainted, refitted, and transformed entirely. While I was busy with these tasks, Clara Benson dropped by carrying a food container and a healthy dose of moral support. "People are buzzing like flies," she reported. "I've been deflecting, but everyone's dying to know. Let them be curious," I replied. "The truth is on the record. I'm not here to manage the narrative anymore. That's what I failed to do during my divorce," Clara said with a bitter laugh. "Spent months curating a strong comeback persona on social media. I've deleted all my accounts," I told her. "For now, I'm not interested in performing a perfect recovery." 10 days after the anniversary party, the settlement was finalized. Logan accepted my counterproposal without protest. Money was no longer his priority. What mattered was securing the non-disclosure clause. We would divorce under irreconcilable differences. All the evidence I had gathered would be sealed but ready to reopen if he ever breached the agreement. Julian Wade kept me updated on the firm. Logan had formally resigned from his partnership, opting to step down before the audit's results were finalized. The public reason was personal, but the timing left little room for doubt. Several major clients were reassigned to other partners. The transition was handled quietly to avoid disruption. Sophie, it turned out, had moved to Chicago, but not to the upscale condo in Bayshore Hill they once envisioned. According to my mother, who maintained minimal contact, Sophie was now renting a modest apartment in Wicker Park. Are they still together? I don't care anymore. 3 weeks after the party, I returned to the office. I gave a simple explanation. I had personal matters to attend to. The firm's leadership welcomed me back without question. The architecture projects I had temporarily reassigned were handed back to me. Work became a refuge, a place that steadied me as I continued healing. On my first day back, I found a small gift on my desk, a cheerful little plant in a handcrafted ceramic pot with a handwritten note from my team. "Growth requires a solid foundation and the courage to rise above." That simple message, handwritten on the card from my colleagues, sat on my desk when I returned. I hadn't expected to tear up reading it, but it was a poignant reminder. Even when some relationships fall apart, others remain steadfast. That evening, I met with a real estate agent, not to sell the house as Logan Hartman once planned, but to discuss renovations. I wanted to transform it into a space that genuinely reflected my own taste and identity. "You're looking to redo the entire interior?" the agent asked, studying my design sketches with interest. "I want to open it up, make it more modern, more filled with natural light." "Have you thought about just starting over in a new place? Might be more practical." "It's not about practicality," I said, and was surprised by how clearly I understood that it's about reclaiming what's mine. This house had been a major part of my life, not just financially, but emotionally. I didn't want to abandon it. I wanted to rebuild, starting from the existing foundation. Just like my life, it had always held potential, but had long been distorted by other people's expectations and influence. The renovation would be extensive, requiring me to temporarily relocate, but once completed, it would be my home built entirely on my own terms. 6 weeks after the anniversary party, Graham Foster called with unexpected news. Logan just accepted a job offer in Seattle. It came through an old client. It's not in traditional law, I nodded. It made sense, leaving Brighton Hills, leaving the firm he'd damaged, and disappearing from the sightlines of those who knew too much. That week, my mother invited me to dinner. Her voice over the phone carried a quiet signal. There was something important she wanted to say. When I arrived, I was greeted by the familiar aroma of slow-simmered beef broth and golden scallion pancakes. Comfort foods from childhood, brought out only when she sensed I needed extra strength. Sophie accepted a job in Portland, she said once we sat down. She's moving next week. I nodded mentally, measuring the distance between Seattle and Portland. Interesting choice, she said. Things with Logan ended. After that night, it all unraveled quickly. There's nothing left holding them together. I wasn't surprised. Their relationship was never rooted in real connection. It had always been about projection, possession, and image building. Sophie wanted what I had. Logan sought novelty instead of learning to grow up. She wants to speak with you before she leaves. My mother added, watching me closely. I stayed quiet for a moment. The fury I once felt had ebbed, replaced by a more complex emotion. Not forgiveness, but perhaps a readiness to see things with broader perspective. I'll think about it. I said, I'm not sure it would help either of us. My mother nodded, not pushing. You know, she said after a pause, when your father passed, I thought my life was over too. But I kept living one choice at a time, one day at a time. I understood what she meant. It wasn't a comparison between death and divorce, but a recognition that any kind of devastation demands rebuilding from within. I've already started, I replied, and this time the foundation's stronger. 2 months after the party, I officially signed the divorce papers. It was all handled through our attorneys, no need to face Logan in person. 10 years of marriage ended with a signature and a list of legal terms. That evening, I sat alone on the back porch of the house that now fully belonged to me. Renovations were set to begin next week. The construction crew was ready to bring the designs I'd finalized with my colleagues to life. The Japanese maple in the front yard, the one I planted during our early days here, still blazed brilliantly in the autumn dusk, untouched by time or neglect. A text popped up from Clara Benson. Officially free day, celebration tomorrow. I smiled and typed back, absolutely not a farewell, more like a beginning. Her reply was immediate, the best kind of beginning. As night fell, I wasn't thinking about what I'd lost, but about what I'd reclaimed: dignity, agency, and a future entirely of my own making. Betrayal had once redefined me. Now it had become the catalyst that made me stronger. The relationships I build from here, be it with friends, family, or someday love, will come from a place of honesty. No more bargains, no more self-erasure like in my old marriage. On a crisp October morning, an envelope arrived at the office. The logo read, Brighton Hills Architectural Foundation. Inside was an invitation to their annual awards ceremony, and my name listed as a nominee for Best Residential Renovation. My fingers grazed the embossed letters and a warmth bloomed in my chest. The house I rebuilt, what began as a form of healing, had become a professional milestone, a silent declaration from a woman who had been broken but never beaten. Congratulations, looks like your work finally got the recognition it deserves. Marilyn Beckett, the executive director at my firm, stood at the doorway to my office, holding an envelope identical to the one in my hand. The foundation sent a formal notice to the company as well. I smiled, still a little stunned by the nomination from the Brighton Hills Architectural Foundation. Thank you, I said. Honestly, this wasn't what I had in mind when I started renovating the house. Marilyn nodded with thoughtful understanding. The best designs often come from personal need, not professional ambition. Your project speaks to something universal, how we restructure our spaces after upheaval. That afternoon, I walked through the house that had earned me the nomination. The exterior still maintained its traditional facade to blend in with the neighborhood, but the interior had become a different world. Entirely, structural walls had been removed to allow natural flow between rooms. The kitchen now featured a spacious center island meant for connection, replacing the formal performative dining that Logan had once insisted on. Floor-to-ceiling windows at the back blurred the line between the living area and the Japanese maple garden. The former master bedroom, once the site of my most painful discovery, was now a sun-drenched studio where I sketched architectural projects. My new bedroom was located at the front of the house, bathed in soft morning light. Something Logan had once complained was too bright to sleep in. Every detail was intentional. This house had become a physical embodiment of the internal journey. I'd undertaken a foundation I didn't abandon, but one I'd reshaped with new function and spirit. In the submission to the foundation, I'd written an architectural statement emphasizing the link between physical reconstruction and emotional healing. A meaningful structure isn't just about how it functions, it's about how it helps people heal, grow, and transform. Apparently, the selection committee had resonated with that perspective. Regardless of the final result, the nomination itself marked a milestone in my journey toward integrating career and personal truth. That evening, I shared the news with my mother over dinner at her house. Recently, she'd been quietly dating a widowed literature professor she met at a public lecture. There was a new light in her eyes, a gentle sort of personal reawakening. "I've been thinking about those patterns again," she said, referencing our conversation after the anniversary party. "Breaking them doesn't just take awareness, it takes deliberate redirection." "Are you talking about the house or my life?" I teased, though I already knew the answer. "Both," she replied, pouring more tea. "You could have just resurfaced things, new paint, new furniture, but instead you redesigned the whole thing." I immediately understood the metaphor. I could have repainted my life too. Started dating again, changed my look, curated a comeback on social media, but instead I chose to look inward to examine the patterns that led me to those wrong turns in the first place. I had once clung to stability so tightly, I ignored warning signs. I had prioritized peace over truth, confused control for care. These didn't excuse the betrayals of Logan and Sophie, but they did teach me how not to fall into that trap again. "You mentioned patterns. Did Sophie reach out again?" I asked. "She called yesterday. Said she's staying in Brighton Hills after all." "Got offered a job here?" My eyebrows lifted. "She's not worried I'll object." "That's why she called? She said if you weren't comfortable, she'd decline the offer." That surprised me. Every message from Sophie in the past had been self-focused, wrapped in emotional justification. This was the first sign of true boundary awareness. "I don't object," I said. After a pause, "The city's big enough for both of us to live separately." My mother nodded. She also said she started therapy trying to understand the competitive dynamic between you two and what's driven her choices. I wasn't expecting miracles, but it was the first real signal that change might be possible. "She mentioned she sent you a letter a couple months ago to your office. Did you get it?" I shook my head. "Maybe a staffer thought it was unimportant. I'll check with my assistant." A few days later, I found myself at another crossroads. Julian Marks, the landscape architect I'd worked with on the garden renovation, and now someone I'd come to trust, had just wrapped up a client presentation with me. As we were packing up, he turned and asked, "Camille, would you like to have dinner with me sometime?" I smiled. "You mean not to talk about design specs?" Julian had entered my life gently, first as a design partner, then a colleague, then something closer to a friend. I'd seen it in the way he listened. The quiet attention in his eyes, but I had always hesitated, not because of him, but because I hadn't yet fully found myself again. "I'd like that," I said, surprised by how light I felt. "But I should say I'm still in the process of healing." "I know," Julian replied with a soft smile. "I'm not rushing anything. Just dinner, conversation, and whatever comes next, we'll let it unfold." That evening's dinner brought an unexpected sense of ease. Julian Marks didn't try to impress. He simply asked thoughtful questions and listened, creating a space for genuine dialogue, rather than the performance most dates turned into. We spoke about architecture, art, personal detours, and professional aspirations, moving fluidly from weighty topics to gentle laughter. "Can I ask you something?" "A little personal," Julian asked softly as dessert was served. I nodded and he continued. "Did being betrayed make you wary of relationships? I mean, not just with men, but with emotional connection in general." The question was direct but not invasive. It felt like a sincere desire to understand. I paused before answering. Honestly? No, I said, surprised to hear the truth come out so clearly. What that experience taught me wasn't fear but awareness. It made me more conscious of my own patterns. The betrayal hurt. Yes, but what changed me most was realizing I had been part of a relationship where real connection had been replaced by performance. Julian nodded, eyes thoughtful. That's a lot further than most people get after something like that. Usually they either retreat completely or leap into something new without looking back. I smiled, thinking of my mother, of Clara Benson, of Graham Foster. The people who helped me stay grounded and honest with myself. I was lucky to have a solid support system, and surprisingly, architecture helped too. Principles of structural integrity apply to both buildings and relationships. When we stepped outside, Julian walked me to my car without any pretense or pressure. His goodbye was warm and measured, leaving room for something to grow if it chose to. I really enjoyed tonight, he said. So did I replied, and meant it. The next morning, as I was finalizing materials for the Henderson project presentation, my assistant Lydia tapped gently on my office door. Hesitant. "Miss Hartman, someone's here to see you." I told her you were preparing for a meeting, but she insisted. Lydia lowered her voice. "It's your sister, Sophie." A wave of surprise swept over me. Sophie Allen had been silent for 18 months, just one letter and then sporadic updates through my mother. No direct contact. Did she say why? She said it's important. And mentioned a letter you may not have received. I considered it carefully. Finally, I nodded. Give her 15 minutes. Sophie entered a few minutes later. She looked nothing like the version of herself I remembered from the anniversary party. Gone was the polished veneer. In its place was a simpler, more subdued presence. Her face carried an unease that felt real. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," she began. I gestured to the chair across from me without much expression. "Mom said you were considering moving back to Brighton Hills," I said. Sophie nodded. "That's partly why I'm here before I accept the job offer. I wanted to make sure my being back wouldn't cause you any pain." Her tone was sincere, absent of the guarded defensiveness that once laced all her words. "My life is steady now," I said. "You coming back won't change that. I also wanted to hand you this," she said, pulling an envelope from her bag. "It's similar to the letter I sent months ago, though I'm not sure it ever reached you. I didn't rush to open it." Keeping my expression neutral. "What's in it?" Things I should have said 18 months ago. A real apology, no justifications, no excuses. I was genuinely surprised. The Sophie I had known used to dramatize everything, to cry and plead, but this was something different. Bare, unadorned accountability. "What changed you?" "Therapy," she admitted. "After everything with Logan collapsed, I had to look inward. I'd spent my life measuring myself against you, wanting what you had, without understanding why you had it." Her words aligned perfectly with what my mother had once said. "And Logan?" I asked. "We haven't spoken since I left Portland." Once the secrecy ended, we realized we had no real foundation. She paused before adding, "He's not doing well." Camille, after losing his job, he grew bitter. Blamed everyone but himself. That tracked with what Graham had told me, that Logan's time in Seattle had ended quietly. "Likely due to similar financial misconduct. I'm not asking for forgiveness." Sophie continued, her tone calm. "And I'm not hoping we'll reconnect. I just needed to say that I know what I did was wrong and I'm trying to change that." There was no manipulation, no deflection. I nodded slowly. "Thank you for saying it in person." As she stood to leave, she paused at the door. "I saw the announcement about your design award nomination. The photos of your house, they're stunning. You created something truly beautiful out of a place that once held so much pain." For the first time, I sensed something new in her gaze. Not envy, but genuine recognition. The Brighton Hills Design Excellence Gala was held on a snowy night at the Preston Bradley Hall, beneath a sweeping glass dome glowing with soft amber light. The annual celebration of architectural achievement had never felt more symbolic. I arrived with my mother and Clara Benson, two women who had witnessed every step of my rebuilding, both physical and emotional. Regardless of the outcome, just being nominated is a milestone. Clara Benson said quietly as we stepped into the Grand Hall hosting the annual Brighton Hills Design Excellence Awards, especially when it's a personal project competing against large-scale developments. The ceremony unfolded in sequence: commercial innovation, heritage preservation, urban planning. When it came time for residential renovation, images of shortlisted projects flashed across the towering screen. I didn't feel nervous, only a gentle detachment. The nomination alone had affirmed that my personal and professional rebuilding had finally merged into one path. When my name was announced as the winner, I paused for a beat. The judge's citation moved me deeply. This project demonstrates the potential of architecture not only to reshape physical spaces, but to restore emotional landscapes, a reimagining of home built on old foundations but carrying new purpose. As I stepped on stage, each footfall felt like retracing the complex path that had led to this moment. Architecture doesn't always require demolition to achieve transformation, I said simply. Sometimes the strongest structures are born from what remains standing after the damage transformed, not by erasure, but by a new vision. I didn't have to name names. Those who knew my story understood. Among them, my mother, her gaze steady, filled with pride. After the ceremony, I had the chance to speak with one of the judges who had championed the project. "What made your submission stand out," she said, "was the marriage of technical clarity and emotional depth. You didn't just create a beautiful space. You created an architectural response to personal rupture." Her words reflected a quiet realization that had been taking shape in me all along, that this house was no longer just my sanctuary. It had become a blueprint for healing. On the way home, my mother suggested we stop by Buckley Fountain as we always had on significant days. The water danced under the city lights, and she turned to me and said, "You've closed a circle tonight, but not by returning to where you began, by rising to a higher plane, like a spiral touching familiar shapes from a new height." It was the perfect metaphor. The elements of my life, success, new connection, family, were still present, but they carried a deeper meaning now, more deliberate, more rooted, more free. 4 days after the ceremony, Julian Marks came over for dinner, his third visit. This time, we were in the house I had rebuilt. The space carried a quiet intimacy as he walked through each room. His admiration was unmistakable. "Photos don't do it justice," he said. "The way the design flows, it feels seamless." "I worked hard to create that continuity," I explained. "Even though the structure changed completely, I needed a through line between past and present." We cooked dinner together, and somewhere between chopping herbs and plating dessert, a deeper alignment began to surface. After we finished, Julian turned to me with his usual directness. "I've really enjoyed getting to know you these past few weeks. If you feel the same, I'd love to keep exploring where this could go." I met his gaze. No pressure, no pretense, just a gentle invitation. 18 months ago, I might have hesitated. "But not now, I'm ready," I said, "as long as honesty and clarity stay front and center." "Absolutely," Julian nodded. "After everything, we both know that building something solid from the start is better than patching it up later." I smiled. Architecture once again mirrored life perfectly. After he left, I stepped into what used to be the heart of my grief, now transformed into a light-filled studio. On my desk was the first draft of my newest project, a community center for women rebuilding their lives after leaving toxic relationships. The concept had been born from long talks with Clara about how design could facilitate healing: open layouts, soft transitions, a blend of old and new materials, each element inspired by my own renovation journey. This project was no longer just mine. It was a foundation for others navigating the dark toward light. The next morning, I opened an envelope from Sophie Allen, the letter she had once tried to send but had been lost. Her careful handwriting described her therapy journey, her evolving understanding of our relationship. For the first time, she admitted I measured my worth through comparison instead of connection. "Instead of being sisters, I turned you into a standard to beat." The letter didn't erase what had happened, but it opened a different possibility. Not reconciliation, but perhaps something built from honesty. I wrote back, brief, respectful, with no promises, but I suggested meeting for coffee on neutral ground. A new beginning if she truly wanted one. As I sealed the envelope, I realized something: I had completed the spiral. Not returning to the same place, but stepping onto a higher level where I chose the direction. Reconnecting with Sophie Allen didn't stem from the old notion of sisterhood, but from a deliberate choice, clear-eyed, conscious, and built on a new foundation. Our relationship now was guided by mutual understanding, not by replaying outdated family roles. That evening, I stood in the redesigned garden watching the season's first snow gather in a fine layer on the branches of the Japanese maple, a quiet witness to painful endings and hard-won renewal. Its bare limbs outlined against the pale gray sky looked both fragile and resilient, much like myself, shaped by rupture, but still full of potential for spring's return. 18 months after that fateful dinner, the night every layer of my life was stripped bare, I no longer stood simply in a new space but as a redefined version of myself, rebuilt from old pieces, selfhood work, relationships once thought immutable. What I constructed wasn't an entirely new life, nor just a patchwork of what remained. It was a reconstruction, a process that retained the strongest foundations while expanding the capacity for growth and survival within them. Julian Marks had become a meaningful part of that framework. And even with Sophie, though the wounds hadn't vanished, I saw a different kind of possibility, a quiet understanding. The events in that crowded room, Logan Hartman's public confession. My premeditated revelation hadn't disappeared, but they no longer dictated how I built forward. What mattered most wasn't revenge, but my ability to live by what I knew was right. To shift from reaction to design, not just recovery, but transformation. 5 years later, I stood on stage at the Brighton Hills Women's Leadership Summit facing an audience of women from law, healthcare, the arts, and business. Each gathered to share in the theme of resurgence after crisis. I've titled my talk, The Architectural Principles of Rebuilding a Life. I began my gaze moving through the hundreds of attentive faces. 5 years ago, my life structure collapsed, but today I'm not here to recount what broke. I'm here to share what I consciously rebuilt. The journey from that devastating banquet to this bright-lit podium hadn't been linear. There were setbacks, disorientation, but through it all, I'd learned to approach life as an architect would, studying not only the foundation, but the design flaws that once made collapse inevitable. When assessing structural damage, I continued. We don't just identify weaknesses, we trace root causes, and most importantly, we determine what still bears weight. In the third row, I saw a familiar face, Sophie. Her presence didn't rattle me. In fact, it felt fitting. Our monthly coffee meetups had evolved into shared evenings with our mother. What had once been rivalry was now a kind of mutual respect and acknowledgement that we each held our own worth and path. Sophie now worked at a nonprofit supporting women in transition. Her own pain had become fuel for healing others. It made me smile quietly. Effective reconstruction, I said, requires us to distinguish substance from spectacle, to know what holds the structure and what's just decorative cladding. That clarity had also guided my relationship with Julian. We were married last spring in the garden behind our home, an intimate ceremony with those who had witnessed my journey. This life we were building wasn't based on dependency, but mutual respect, clear boundaries, and growth in tandem. As for Logan, after Seattle, he drifted to lesser roles in Denver and Phoenix. We crossed paths only once more at the funeral of a mutual friend. Our exchange was polite but hollow, strangers with shared history and nothing left to say. In reconstruction, I continued. Architects must identify the load-bearing walls versus the parts that can shift. That lesson didn't just help me renovate a house, it reshaped the arc of my entire career. From the home renovation that started it all, I'd led my firm to establish a new division dedicated to healing-centered design. Our first project, a community center for women recovering from emotional abuse and divorce, was completed last year. It had been featured not just in architectural journals, but in publications focused on trauma recovery. Restoration isn't about erasing the scars. I concluded it's about transforming them into meaningful contours, like the Japanese art of kintsugi, repairing broken pottery with gold, not hiding the cracks but elevating their value. As I said those words, I thought of everyone still present in my life, connections tested through adversity, not flawless but genuine, not easy but enduring. My marriage to Julian Marks, the deep reconnection with Sophie Allen, the enduring friendship with Clara Benson, and the steadfast support of colleagues throughout the reconstruction journey, All of it was the result of careful selection. No longer relationships born out of habit or convenience, but connections nurtured through clarity, intention, and honesty. Qualities I hadn't yet learned to embody before everything collapsed. I've spoken before about that infamous anniversary dinner when my husband confessed to an affair while I already held the divorce papers in hand. It was unforgettable, yes, but that wasn't the defining moment. What truly shaped my story were the days that followed when I chose to rebuild, not just react, to begin again rather than sink into bitterness. As the leadership summit ended with resounding applause, I understood the deepest truth. Real transformation doesn't come from singular shocks, but from the quiet decisions made afterward. What to keep, what to release, what to rebuild, and what to begin entirely anew. As the auditorium emptied, Sophie Allen approached. She didn't say much, just placed a gentle hand on my arm and whispered, "You've created something more meaningful than you realize." Her face carried the weight of everything we'd been through, but this time there was no defensiveness, no history clouding the present, just two women who had weathered their own storms. We stepped out of the conference center into the bright spring sunlight of Brighton Hills. The fresh air and blooming city felt like a confirmation we weren't returning to where we began. We were forming a new circle shaped by shared memory, but reforged with experience and individual growth. And that, I realized, was the final proof that healing, when met with courage and clarity, can lead to bonds more lasting and authentic than anything that existed before the fracture. Sometimes life forces us to face moments that feel insurmountable, but just as an architect sees potential in a crumbling structure, we too can find rebirth in the wreckage. The story of Camille Hartman is not just about surviving betrayal, it's a blueprint for a new life, one rebuilt with intention, with self-respect, with healthy love, and with clarity in every decision. If you've ever stood in the ruins of something you thought would last, know this. You don't have to go back to who you were. You can become someone even stronger, more beautiful because of what you've endured. If this story touched something deep within, you don't forget tap. Like, if you felt empowered, share this video with someone who might need a gentle hug in words, and subscribe to the channel, hit the bell so you won't miss the next healing story. Thank you for staying until the very end. See you again soon on the next meaningful, soul-stirring journey.